Hi, everyone. So today my team has been nice enough, almost all of my Android team, to join me. So they're right there, which means that if I say something that is not true, you can just ask them questions later about, if I actually know what I'm talking about. Because in case you didn't notice, this is not going to be a management talk at all. Yes, it will be. So it won't contain any code. So if you want to learn techniques and technology, you're in the wrong room, and you can leave right now. I won't be offended. Instead, I'm going to do something different. Instead, I'm going to try to tell you, how do I make more money? That's why you're all here, right? Show of hands, seriously. All right, that's what I thought. Well, I have good news and bad news for you. The good news is, we will talk about that. The bad news is, you're not going to like what I'm about to say, but it's all right, because hopefully it will help you. And the first thing we need to talk about is tracks, because if you don't understand the tracks, then you can't even plan. And I'm talking about parallel tracks, because a common mistake is that people believe that in order to get more money, get more seniority, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you need to be promoted to manager, right? But it's not true. In fact, if it were true, and you were in such company, and I know that we're in France, and many of them are kind of like that, but you should either make the company change their practices or change company altogether. So on one axe, you have this seniority, which is related to money, but it's not exactly money. There's lots of exceptions. And on the other hand, you have different roles. So we're talking about different job that you're doing. You're either an individual contributor, a tech lead, or a manager. And those are completely different things. They do different things. They serve different purposes. And within those different tracks, you have different levels. But notice that the manager doesn't go higher up than the tech lead or the individual contributors. That's on purpose. The best companies, like Google, that kind of very high-level tech company, they try to reward their best engineers. So they have to have a way to compensate them really, really high. And don't take my word for it. There is a website dedicated to comparing those levels across company. It's called Level FYI. I strongly encourage you to look at it. Now, those bad, quote-unquote, companies, what they're in fact doing, they're blocking your career, right? They put artificial roadblocks for you to get more money, more influence, more seniority, more skills. In those companies, you have to move to a manager to be higher up. So it's not exactly true, and everything that I'm about to say, by the way, is very generic, right? There is no single ways. There's more and more standards, but there is no single ways that company do that kind of thing. So it's going to be a little bit different based on your own situation, your own company, your own country, your own culture, and all of that. But it is a generic framework to think about it. In some cases, when you go to really high up, it is true that if you're a senior VP at a tech company or something like that, it might go a little bit higher up. But the important part is that you don't get blocked really early on as an individual contributor. That'd be really bad. Okay, so that's sort of like how you should think about it. Now, you want to level up, I'm assuming. It's actually on purpose that it's symmetric at the top but asymmetric at the bottom. That's okay, and that is because for those two roles, the tech lead and the manager, you have to have some experience, right? It is very difficult, but not impossible, to have the kind of impact that a tech lead or manager needs to be when you're just getting started. I've seen it, though. It's possible. I've seen tech leads right out of schools. It's usually on smaller companies where there's a need for that role. Again, it's a different job. But it's unusual, and that's, again, by design. But you might think that the path to get there is very foggy. You don't know, especially if you're a very junior person, you don't know how to get there. So I'm going to try to give you a sort of a map. Again, it's a very generic map. The beginning is easy. The beginning is literally 1, 2, 3. You start as a junior, you get to mid-level, you get to senior software engineer. And that's what most people want to do at the beginning. That's what they should do for most people. And that's not really hard. We're going to talk about that. It's really, really straightforward. Again, remember that in different companies, you're going to have different levels. So what is senior in one company might actually not be senior in another. But in mine, actually, we boiled it down to a single word. And we took inspiration from others that have been doing that. And it's really efficient, especially for a manager, to communicate what you should do at each level. First, you learn. Then you refine your skills. And finally, your full-blown execution. Again, lots of exceptions, so this is very generic. When you're junior, you're learning. Learning is your main job. You should not be surprised to be learning maybe 80% of the time. And that's because anything that you're doing it and learning at the same time. You're learning by doing. You absorb everything you can from more senior people, or at least you should, and that's how you level up at that stage. One trick that actually worked really well for Narine right there is running at hard problems. He would come to me and be, Fabien, what is the hardest thing I can do that I haven't done before? And that got him where he is today because he constantly was putting himself just outside of his comfort zone. And that's how you learn. If you're in your comfort zone, of course, you're not going to learn anything new, but if you're too far out, it's too difficult, and so you don't learn either. So you have to be right in the middle to progress faster. At this stage, you're doing small tasks, and you need lots of guidance, by the way. As a mid-level developer, you're learning still. Guess what? Your job is still to learn a lot. Maybe half your time is learning. And you still need guidance. One of the common mistakes is that people that get there think that if they start asking for help, they're going to look weak, and they're not going to get their next promotion. And the reason is because some companies have set up wrong incentives. In fact, what you should be doing is asking for help, and that's how you're going to get to the next level. While you're still learning, you still need help, even though you're not quote-unquote junior anymore. At this stage, you're doing mid-sized tasks, small project. Again, this is very generic. It depends on your company. You should know that stuff. You should ask that if you don't know. As a senior, you still learn. Guess what? Learning is forever. You're going to learn your entire time, but you learn a little bit less, maybe. You're more focused on execution than learning at this stage. You're fully autonomous, even on big projects. That's what it means to be senior. Your manager gives you something, you run with it, sometimes for months. And that's where you also start teaching and mentoring. So in some company, I have discussion, preparation to this talk, and for some company, actually, senior means something different. For senior, it's actually an even higher level, where you have like maybe very large project, even a team level kind of impact. So be careful about the titles, they're not standard. But you're gonna ask me how? How do I get there? You haven't taught me anything. Well, I have a bunch of tricks, and my team is sick hearing about it, but there's a bunch of tricks which I believe have been helpful on how to think about this. One key ingredient to becoming more senior is the balance between over-engineering and what I call under-engineering, or hacky code. And a common mistake is that some people think that over-engineering is somehow better than hacky, or that hacky is better because you're taking the shortest path. In practice, they're just as bad. And as time goes on, as hopefully you get more senior, you're going to make progress, in something that looks like that. In the middle, of course, it's impossible to reach a perfect level of engineering. And it's impossible for a simple reason, which is that it's a moving target. How do you know that something is over-engineered? Well, you know that something is over-engineered relative to a specification, but that changes. So the moment you write your code, even if it were perfect, 1 minute later, it's wrong. So that's by design, that there's this wiggle room. But as an engineer that's trying to get better, you need to come closer to that right level of balance. So some people start by over-engineering most of their code. Some people start by writing just hacky code. I've seen both cases. In both cases, what you want to do is, if you're writing too hacky code, you want to design a little bit better, have a better architecture, and vice versa. And you're going to overshoot, and that's okay. When you overshoot, you need to realize that and correct. And as you do that, hopefully, you tend to be closer to the perfect line. You'll never get there, ever, but you tend to be closer in each new piece of software that you build. And that sort of funnel is the measurement of how senior you are. And by the way, a good manager should try to make that slope faster, right? You should get there faster if you have a good manager. Another trick that I have is what I call just-in-time refactoring. So that's to help you reach that line. Refactor not too late, but not too soon. Just in time, just as needed. Because again, the requirements are changing. Very often, you think that you have it right, and then requirements change under you. And that's why the next one is actually about predicting the future. And predicting the future is a skill. It can be improved. As an expert, you're paid for your ability to predict the future. Think about, why do you go to the doctor? You go to the doctor because you want to know, what are the risks if I take that treatment? Will that treatment work versus this other one? That's a form of predicting the future. It's impossible to predict the future with great accuracy. It's just not possible, especially far away. But you can get just better. And if you are better at predicting the future than random chance, you're already adding value. Why? Because it allows you to make better choices. If you know a little bit where the future is going, then you can make better choices now. That makes your life easier later. Otherwise, you're going to design yourself into a corner. So some people, for example, think that there is a code that is better because it's more flexible, more extensible. But the reality is all trade-offs. So you're going to be adding flexibility on one axis, and you're going to lose it on the other side. And so if you got it wrong, yes, you build a great extensible code, but it's extensible in the wrong way. And most important than all of that, it allows you to know what not to do. And I've always told my team, the best code is the code you never wrote. It's bug-free. It's perfect. Even not just the wrong abstraction that you didn't need or that kind of stuff, but even the feature. Maybe your PM is really insistent that you should build that. But if you manage to negotiate not to build a feature, you might ship faster. And you're actually going to have a greater impact by not doing things and doing only the right thing. It's called doing the 80-20. Another thing that I find helpful is to tell people that, classic curve of the cost of finding a bug versus when you find it. The earlier you find a bug, it's exponentially less costly than later down the line. Obviously, if your bug is found in production by your actual users, it costs a lot. It can kill your company if the bug is severe enough. But most people don't realize that the only logical conclusion from this graph is that if it's wrong, it shouldn't compile. Most people don't reach that conclusion. They stop at around the unit test level. If my tests are catching it, it doesn't go into production, that's great. But that's wrong. It should, if my unit test catch something, I failed. I failed to make a code that would not even go wrong to begin with, because it's built in such a way that the wrong peg doesn't go into the square hole at all. It's type safety, all that kind of stuff. By construction, your code is more correct. That's obviously better. Doesn't mean you should not write tests. You should, because you're never going to achieve that all the time. But that's what you should strive for. The next is a kind of obvious one also, but it's very important. Communication is everything, at all levels. Just because you're a developer coding into your little corner in your perfect world of code doesn't mean that you should not communicate effectively, and learn that right from the beginning. Because it becomes even more critical the higher up you go. Not just for managers, but even for very senior developers. Most of what they do is communication. There's different types, so you should not get better at one and not the other. You should work on your written style, verbal, one-on-one versus group, inside the team, but also outside of your team. And one that's often forgotten is going up, communicating with executives, with your boss, with your boss's boss. If you develop that skill called managing up, you will get better, you'll go faster, you'll have more impact. But you're going to tell me I want to be promoted right now. Okay, here's how to get promoted. Again, you're not going to like my answer. The way to be promoted is to be already at the next level of impact. That's it. There's no shortcut. And in fact, for most people, they tell me, but why don't I get promoted right now? Well, if you were doing the kind of things that the next level of impact is supposed to do, then you would be promoted automatically. Because well-functioning organizations, they promote people as soon as they demonstrate that next level of impact. Now, there's a few things that are important, though, that you can work on right away. Be part of the solution, not part of the problem. The management, the executives, other team, they don't want to have someone that brings problem. They want to have someone that brings solution. Everything is always broken, all the time. And, you know, as engineers, most of us are engineers, and you usually see that, and we get frustrated. It's great to identify a problem, but if you come to your boss with the solution to that problem on top of pointing out that something is broken, you're more likely to be promoted. Another thing that they sometimes don't tell you, and that should not exist but is unfortunately true pretty much everywhere, is that visibility matters. If you do great things but nobody knows about it, you're not going to get promoted. And it should not matter, right? It should not be like that, but it is true. If you have to ask for it, though, you're not ready. You're not ready, or you have a bad manager. And unfortunately, that happens a lot. In that case, you should escalate, you should change company, do whatever it takes. It does happen. But if you have a well-functioning organization and a good manager, you should not even have to ask. You just do the next level job, and you'll get promotion. So great, you're here. You're a senior now. Congratulations. It's great, by the way. Stay there if you want. There's nothing wrong with that. But if you do want to go higher up after that, what do you do? Well, that's where it gets more complicated. The beginning is simple. Get better at developing software, right? After that, you get to have different paths. And every single path is going to be completely different. There's not a single way to get there. So again, I'm going to provide you a generic map. On the individual contributor path, you can just continue to have more and more and more impact through code. But companies usually have a terminal level around senior staff, it depends, where it's okay to stay there forever. As a junior, because you're mostly learning as opposed to executing, and you're using resources, right, because you're learning from other more senior people, it's often not okay to stay there. They want you to get to the next level. But once you're at a certain level of impact, it's absolutely okay to stay there forever. Be very happy. If you want to go higher up, again, the best company have special levels for that, but you have to get to a really, really high level of impact at this point. Organization-wide, company level type of impact, where you changed the company. You won a lot of revenue through your contributions. And this is true for all paths, by the way. Unfortunately, as you get really high, it gets really difficult. Now, the tech lead path is the one that you're probably most familiar with, as opposed to, except the normal software engineer path. And it actually leads to CTO. So if you go to the other path of management that I'm going to get to, the CTO is actually parallel to the VP of engineering most of the time. The VP of engineering manages people. The CTO manages technology. And in many companies, like ours, has no direct reports at all. As a tech lead, what do? You own the infrastructure, the architecture of the code, the technological choices. But you still need people skills. You need to convince. You need to advocate. You need to communicate those choices. And that's important, even if you're not a manager, to delegate as a tech lead. You should not do everything yourself. There's a great talk by Pierre-Yves on how to be a great tech lead. So I would strongly encourage you to watch that. So one important thing, by the way, is that I said at the beginning it's parallel, which means if you do change track, you're actually making a lateral move. You're changing your role, but that doesn't come with more money, unfortunately. It's just a change of role. So you're either a junior manager or you're a junior tech lead. If you go the management route, you can get to engineering manager, director of engineering, VP of engineering, but you don't have to. Why? Why would you want to do that? Again, like I told you, this is not the path to more money, more fame, or whatever. Here are the bad reasons for wanting to become a manager. You want more power. You want more decision-making abilities. It turns out the managers are not deciding anything. The people that are building the product actually decide way more. You want to tell people what to do and how to do it. Nope. The manager is not a boss. You want more money. Again, I just told you, that's not a good reason to become a manager. There's better ways to get more money. You want the status or the prestige. Or you just don't like your job and you want to try something new. Well, I mean, maybe, but that's not the best reason. In fact, the manager is actually a service function. You're here to support your people. If you're doing your job right, nobody notices. This is why people are always saying, well, what's the manager doing anyway? If you say that, it might be that the manager is actually doing the job right. In some cases, they're just slacking around. But if they're doing their job right, nobody notices. One of my, in my other team, I have the iOS team too now, and they came to me and they were like, it's incredible. I started this project. Everything was ready. I got to do everything really fast. The API was in place. The design, the other teams had everything I needed. I had a great week. And I was like, yeah, that was a month of work for me, but I'm glad. I'm glad that this worked. You have to let go of your Legos, like some people say. You have to give away responsibilities. That's why you're doing less building, because you're doing that through your people, so you have to give it to them. Instead, you're a coach, you're a mentor. You set expectations. In fact, very often you're the chief psychology officer. You just listen to people and their problems. That's why active listening is your best tool, because what you're trying to do is for people to solve those problems by themselves. You handle staffing constraints, you plan for careers, you review and manage performance. Sounds fun, right? And you delegate as fast as possible. You have no time. So the only thing you can do is, as soon as something comes onto your plate, you delegate it. And you're not here to make people happy. People think that your manager should make you happy. They're not here to make you happy, they're here to make you successful instead. Now here comes the not fun part. And that's why a lot of people come back from management, and I can't blame them. Given enough reports, there is always something going wrong at any given time, always. It might be personal, it might be technical, it might be anything. But there is always something. This is why around 7 direct reports, it starts to be challenging. 10 and up is just really hard. It's emotionally taxing. You're constantly in pain. If you care about your job, at least, you're going to be feeling the pain of those people. And you're not building stuff. You don't even know what's your impact. It's really difficult to realize what kind of impact did I have this week, this month, because you're not building stuff. You sometimes have to let someone go. That's your job too. You have to deal with conflicts. You're context switching all the time. It's the opposite of coding when you're in the zone for 2, 3, 4 hours. Instead, you're context switching all the time, and you don't even own your own time. It's harder and more stressful than you think. I had my first anxiety attack of my entire life after becoming a director. It's serious. But there is a solution. If you have a great mentor, which I do, I'm going to show them to you. You take a step back and you don't let it get to you. Because if you're not mentally healthy, then you cannot help your team. By the way, it's okay to go back and forth. I have a former manager and mentor that went all the way to director of engineering and went back to senior engineer. He's at Netflix now, just contributing code. He's really, really happy. And you can go back between engineering management, tech lead, back to contributor, individual contributor, and it's absolutely okay. And if the company that you work for do not support that, they don't know what they're doing. In fact, I have a mandatory reading for all the people that I have that wants to be manager or became manager. It's this article by Charity Majors. It's amazing. It talks about that. It talks about going back and forth. Actually, it's the second part of another one that's on the same theme. And it talks about how hard it is. So before they choose to go to management, I make them read that. Some of them say, okay, never mind then. You can fully learn to manage without doing it, though. So that's why you need great mentors. My main mentor is Sonia. She's amazing. She's also a friend. And I'm very happy because she joined our company, so I get to work with her again. And she taught me you have to learn to manage up. Even as an individual contributor, this is so important. If your boss is not that great or doesn't have the time, well, maybe you need to manage your boss. If you care, it's important, you're going to be a better boss. But if you care too much, it will destroy you. It's another thing I learned from her. Martin is the one who went back to Netflix as an individual contributor. Taught me to pick my battles. Can't fight them all. And to shield your report from BS. It's the most important job of the manager, so that they can do their job. Dave, who's my most recent mentor, taught me to listen more than I talk. I talk a lot, especially today. But he is amazing. I call him the Jedi Master. Over an hour of one-on-one with his people, he's going to talk 5 minutes. He just listens and speaks only when you have something really important to say. And it's a superpower. He changes people's mind by saying nothing. It's amazing. There's a book on the subject called Quiet, by the way. He also taught me that the speed at which you remove stuff off of your plate is directly related to how good of a manager you are. Because you can't have things on your plate as a manager. Because, like I said, you're going to be interrupted constantly, so you never get to do that thing. You need to delegate it immediately. And the higher up you go, the worse it gets. I thought I had it nailed down, and then I had another team, and next thing I knew, I didn't know to delegate that much anymore. And there is way more. Unfortunately, I don't have time to do an entire talk on management, but there is a couple of techniques, and I really want to talk to you about some of them if we have the time, and even maybe ask you which one is what you're more interested in. The last one is managing managers. I'm still learning that. It's really hard. One of them, maybe the most useful, is the manager README. It's a very, very classic technique that many people are doing nowadays, where you write a README, like a code base, about yourself. How do you operate? So for me, I talk about my most important principles. What are my values? How do I function? What do I value and therefore will look for in others? You also say how you're expecting people to work day to day. Do I go and come to work at 8 in the morning? Definitely not. Or is it required of me that I be there at certain hours? All that kind of stuff. It helps, especially at scale. When you're starting to have a big team, instead of repeating yourself, you can just give them the document and discuss it with them. Adapting your management style to the person in front of you. When I started, I thought, oh, I need to find my groove. I need to find my management style, and I'll be there, and I'll be amazing. But actually, it turns out it's harder than that. You have to adapt your style to the individual that you're managing. The way to give feedback SBI is something that Florian and I talked about. It's great. Running effective one-on-ones. If you are asking your people, what did you do today? What did you do this week? In your one-on-one, you're not doing your job. You're here to coach them, help them grow, solve problems for them, plan their career, tell them what is most likely to work next, think about the future, but not status update. Another very useful technique that we employed successfully is coaching circles. If you cannot find a great mentor or your boss doesn't have the time, you find your peers and you coach each other. And the way you do that is you never solve their problem, you ask questions. It's very powerful to ask questions as opposed to try to jump to solutions. Solve the person's problem directly. It's not how you coach. Writing level descriptions sounds silly, but we spent maybe a year on that alone. And the reason is because otherwise, your people won't know what is expected of a certain level. And if you try to be too specific, they're going to play the checkbox games. Did I do this? I do that? Okay, I get promoted now, right? No. So you have to be more generic, but still clear. It's hard. Managing 360. When you're managing as a manager, you actually manage all around. You're managing your boss, like I said, managing up is really important. But you're also managing your team, obviously, and your peers, because you have to negotiate with another team for some resource. You have to negotiate a conflict that is not from people reporting to you exclusively. Maybe it's your team with another team. You're basically managing a peer. And like I say, managing managers, I'm still figuring that out. So thank you. And I wanted to leave enough time for questions. Not everyone at the same time.
Thank you. So can you recommend any book or technique how to learn how to say no?
How to learn how to say no?
Yes.
It's a very important skill. I don't have a book on that specific subject, but the best books that I found are actually stories. They're stories of companies or people, biographies, that kind of stuff. So one that is amazing is Creativity Inc. It's the story of Pixar, but it talks a lot about management. And it's also a cool story. Like I said, the book Quiet, there is The Effective Executive, is a classic. Yeah, those are a few. Oh, actually, another one is Thinking Fast and Slow, which talks about psychological biases. It's based on actual studies. It's not about management at all, but since you're managing humans, it's extremely important to be aware of human biases, which are many. Other questions?
Could you give us a sneak peek of your README?
Sure. So I actually did not plan on doing that right now, but I want to, can I maybe just make sure that I don't show something bad? You know. A little bit of confidential information in my computer. Hopefully I have Wi-Fi. So I was planning on making it public, so I don't know, maybe I'll do it soon. This works. So the most important part is actually those core principles: transparency, brutal honesty, freedom, and trust. Obviously, transparency is really important, but personally, I'm brutally transparent, which means that I tell them everything unless I'm required by law not to tell them. Or I have a direct order from my boss, which happens more often than I wish. Brutal honesty, it's classic. It's now called radical candor, but I prefer brutal honesty. Freedom, I don't recruit like smart people to tell them what to do. That's just stupid, right? If you're recruiting people and you try to boss them around, like I mentioned earlier, they're going to leave. So I give them as much freedom as I possibly can. I tell them, what do you want to do next? We have projects and stuff, we have deadlines, and I'm like, what do you want to do? Trust, if you have to earn your manager's trust, I think it's a mistake. I think you should give your trust until they, hopefully never, but until they break it. And then operational principles, more boring, priorities, escalation, that kind of stuff, hours, administrative, boring. Oh, and there's my quirks. Right. A lot of them, as you can see. So there's many online. So this is mine, but there is many managers with me that you can read online. You can just search for it.
Cheers, thanks very much. That was really great. You spoke about level descriptions, and I totally agree with making them less specific and more generic is a good thing. However, I wonder what you thought about, because iterating on level descriptions can be really difficult because you end up changing the goalposts over a long period of time for people. Yeah. And how then would you differentiate different roles to have different levels, i.e. mobile engineer, back-end engineer, platform engineer kind of thing?
You're absolutely right. It's an extremely hard problem. To avoid changing the goalpost, what we did is we actually rewrote the levels to describe what we were actually doing. So actually we realized that our wiki was not what we're actually doing during calibration process, during promotion. We were not actually basing ourselves on the wiki. So we wrote what we actually thought was a better description of what we were actually doing, and we told people that. We also changed it at the beginning of the cycles. Yeah. That was important. That way you have, we do it every 6 months, so you had 6 months sort of adapt to the new descriptions. And then we run an experiment that failed. We tried to write examples. So you say, how do you do the difference between mobile engineers versus back-end engineers, all that kind of stuff. We tried to write examples that are domain-specific. So mobile, web, back-end, and so on. And it failed. completely. We couldn't write them in such a way that was both helpful and not going back into the checklist mentality, where people are just being like, yeah, I did all those things that you told me to do. Can I get my promotion now? Which is not how it works. In particular, people would do it, and it's like, I've done that one thing for 5 minutes. That's the level 5, right? So I'm a level 5, clearly. No, actually, you're out of school, and that thing you did it really, really badly. So that's not what it means to be at that level. What it means is to consistently do that thing amazingly well. So we spent a lot of time explaining that. And so instead, for the examples, what we said to our teams is, well, you know what? Just talk to us. We'll tell you, we'll give you personalized examples with context, that kind of stuff, but we cannot write them down. We tried 3 different formats for them in many different teams. Didn't work.
Cool, that makes sense. Thanks.
In the back.
Nice talk about the levels for your information. This, in most companies, they have a grade for levels in your engineers, staff, principals. And do you think companies should open their salaries spreadsheet?
Yes.
Within the companies, not to open to the public?
No, even to the public.
Even to the public?
That's my personal controversial opinion. By the way, this is my opinion, not the position of my employer.
Actually, in my previous company, somebody did this. When he left, he became a legend, but not to the management.
Definitely not. So Buffer does that. Buffer have public, as in public to the world. They have formula, they have public levels, and the salary that goes with it. It's obviously very controversial. I think maybe it's going too far, but I think that it's important for transparency. I think more information wants to be free. So people talk anyway, right? So what we ended up being is in that situation, which is like you don't know officially, and you don't know the people's level as well. That's another thing we did not reveal, but people know. They talk, and it's just useless to try to hide information like that. So I'm very much in favor of it. Yes. Oh, also, obviously, having salary information is fairer to everyone.
Do you think there can be unlimited progress, and more importantly, how to avoid the Peter principle, where you tend to rise to a level where you're unskilled for?
To me, the Peter principle is probably because of people going to management because they don't see a pattern in what they're already good at. By the way, you should focus on your strengths, not your weaknesses. Like, if you are amazing with your feet and you touch the ball like nobody else, should you be like, I should do basketball because I'm not very good with my hands? Or should you become the best soccer player in the world, right? So that's why I think it's so important that companies, I think Google is the most famous for that, but like all tech companies in the Valley nowadays do that, to have this path, right? This path as an individual contributor. And as to whether or not there is a limit, it is my opinion that no, there is no limit. I haven't seen it yet, at least. We have someone in our company that got promoted from individual contributors all the way to CTO of our brokerage operations, which is a position that did not even exist. We just created it for him because he was continuing to have, as an individual contributor, lots and lots of impact. He was kind of behaving a little bit like a tech lead at that stage, but he was refusing to be named tech lead. We created extra levels for him. Those people have that much impact, and he's still making progress. I don't know, we're doing on time? All right, thank you very much.